Hey folks, welcome to another video. I'm out here doing evening chores for the chickens right now. It's a beautiful evening. Seems like a rainstorm might be starting to roll in, but the clouds are gorgeous on this beautiful, cool July day. And while I was out here, I just wanted to make a little video talking about Cornish Cross as a breed and aiming to debunk some of the myths that are out there about this breed. Before we get into the video, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. It helps the channel a lot. Thanks for watching, and let's get right into it. So you can see the chickens are extremely active, and this is the scene I usually come to when I come to do chores, and particularly after I move them to fresh grass. They excitedly run about foraging and finding grasshoppers and spiders, and you can see they're active chickens behaving quite normally, and they're young now, but they'll continue to do this. Part of our management with the broilers is restricting their feed throughout the day, and a lot of what you'll read in the literature is restricting 12 hours on where they get free access to feed and 12 hours off where you remove it. And we actually ration their feed throughout the day, which allows them to eat what they need to have a good growth rate, and for our feed ratios, which is simply just the amount of feed put in to the amount of weight gain that they have, economically work for us, because feed is really the main cost of this enterprise, while also allowing them to get hungry in between meals. You think about how really any animal would behave, and I talk about myself, how I would behave if I had 24-hour or even just 12-hour a day access to all of the food that I wanted in whatever quantity I wanted. I'd probably get a bit apathetic too and sit there and eat heaps of spaghetti and meatballs and chili and all my favorite foods. But because I get a little hungry and don't do that to myself, I am stimulated to be active and seek activity. And it's very similar with the chickens. Whenever we move the tractors, they've been deprived of feed for a minimum of 12 hours. And as soon as we get them onto fresh grass, they're actively foraging because they're hungry. And if they were just always satiated, they would just be looking at me like, when's the next meal? But they expect to be hungry, and because of that, they know that they can have a high forage uptake. And we see that not only in the pastures, but in the quality of their meat. Another idea that people have about Cornish is that they just lay there in their own feces, and that for some reason them laying instead of roosting is abnormal chicken behavior, and that the roosting instinct, which is, a trademark of this species, is bred out of them, when in reality, any Cornish cross or most broiler chickens anyone's ever eaten are grown and processed before they're at any kind of mature age. They develop a roosting instinct later in life, as most chickens do. But we have observed in our brooder, even when they're really small, as well as on some of the diagonal cross braces on the Salatin pens, that the ones that can fit will roost. So exposing them to a place where they can roost will encourage that behavior. But if you've ever observed really young pullets or any kind of baby chicken, that roosting instinct doesn't really develop more fully until they're older animals. And, treating these baby chickens, though they might grow fast, and expecting them to have the same behaviors as a mature laying hen is just unrealistic. Another myth that I'd like to talk about is that the meat doesn't taste as good, and that the quality is lower, less lean meat, and just an overall less complex flavor. Again, I think this comes down to what feed you choose, as well as management. Our birds, because we do feed restriction, opt to get exercise because they're walking around in their pens. And since we move them every day, they have fresh forage to seek. We've also toyed around over the years between doing home batches and tasting other farms' chicken and asking what kind of feed they use, how that impacts the flavor in our experience. We're really happy with the feed that we use now and feel like that, combined with daily moves, combined with feed restriction, has turned out some of the most delicious birds we've ever had. And we've had really positive feedback from our customers as well. So there's this conception that other heritage birds and anything except for a Cornish is in this upper echelon of flavor and quality. And I think that Cornish can be just as delicious. It's just that most of the Cornish that people taste are not fed organic, not moved daily, not on fresh, high quality pasture, and aren't encouraged to exhibit some of their natural behaviors through things like feed restriction. So yeah, I encourage anyone who is skeptical about the quality of Cornish Cross meat to try one of our chickens. This is the feed that we use. It comes from a farm just about 2.5 or 3 hours east of here, and they mill all of this organic grain right there on the farm and deliver it straight to the farm. The next myth is that they drop dead like flies, and that's because they have extremely weak genetics and that they're just not suited to live in this world. And sure, they're a bit different than an athletic heritage breed egg-laying chicken, but in our experience, they're about 90% of what any normal chicken is in terms of behavior and athleticism and health and all these things. Again, it depends, right? If you get chicks from a non-reputable hatchery, or perhaps a bad batch, or, you know, if the management isn't dialed in a way where you are seeing success, it's easy to point the finger and say, oh, it's just the species, and that's why, or the breed rather, and that's why this happened, rather than looking at the management practices and perhaps trying to source chickens from a different place. We've had nothing but really positive results whenever we've raised Cornish Cross, and have had mortalities always under our target of 10% across the whole batch. So on a batch of 300 chickens, we're losing less than 15 birds, and we feel really happy about that. Some of the issues like heart attacks and joints not being able to keep up with the growth rate of the animal, and these types of things that people hear about with Cornish Cross are, in my opinion, more a factor of having constant access to feed and just gorging themselves and growing too fast. I think we really ought to think about these things in terms of how we treat ourselves. And if we were just gorging ourselves 24/7 and eating whatever we want and not necessarily being encouraged to exercise, our body and health would trend towards a certain direction. Whereas when food is restricted and we're encouraged to move about our environment and get exercise, our body trends in a different direction. And so with any kind of pasture management of pastured broilers, those are the things I think that producers ought to be looking to maximize, is the health of the bird, while balancing that with a growth rate and a feed conversion that is economically viable, because ultimately this is a business and we have to make decisions that allow us to continue to do it. I've talked about in the past wanting to move in a direction where we allow a bit more room for the chickens and run them in bigger batches with a portable electric net like we have in this setup over here. It's a higher risk way of going about it, because if I can fit several hundred birds in a net like this and move a shelter daily or whenever it seems appropriate to do so, if one predator like a coyote or fox gets in, that could be a huge loss. Whereas if one of these gets breached, it's a much lower loss, right? This is, in our current setup, losing 1/5 of a batch. since we have 5 of these tractors running. So it's that balance point of finding what works and learning the predator pressure of this place so that we can feel comfortable giving them a little bit more of a free-ranging setup, but valuing their quality of life and not getting eaten and decimated by a coyote busting through while we're still seeing how much of a possibility that is here at this farm. We left a couple of smaller Cornish from the last batch just to kind of watch how they behaved as they got older. We've got them running in with the geese just to give them some space that's separate from our other chickens, and we've really noticed that, you know, in carefully observing them over a longer period of time, they really just act like normal chickens. They roost. I've got the gobbledygook here just as a shade structure because the geese will be gone before the turkeys come out. But they roost at night and they graze and forage really intensively. Some days I give them very little feed and notice their crops are still full from the grazing. They're very active. Anytime I've had to chase them down and catch them, it is extremely challenging. And, you know, I think that it just comes down, like I've said, to management. These chickens have a really bad reputation, partially because the conditions that they're managed in plays to their worst attributes. But when treated with respect and dignity and put on fresh ground and deprived of food so they're not just satiated all the time, they behave quite like you would expect a chicken. So it's interesting to learn and kind of debunk this caricature that people have of what Cornish Cross are. So yeah, I just wanted to take a little time while I was out here doing evening chores to debunk some of the myths about Cornish Cross as I see it. There's this really overblown caricature amongst some circles within the regenerative ag scene and amongst consumers that they're this disgusting breed that just lays in their own poop and can barely move and grow so fast that they have heart attacks. And that can be true. It can be true of really any creature that you're caring for and stewarding, that if you're managing them in a way that doesn't enable them to express their full health and their natural physiology, that they'll suffer. For us, it's a strong economic choice to raise the Cornish Cross, and the quality is something we're really happy with. And we're really happy with the birds' behavior. Thanks for watching another video, and I'm curious if you have any thoughts on raising chickens and the breeds that you may have raised in your experience, particularly those who have had positive experiences raising Cornish. And yeah, it's something I'm really interested in diving into and talking with folks about. So I appreciate you watching, and we'll see you in the next video.